Leonard Falcone is still a legend in East Lansing. There, he is of course still remembered as a pioneering euphonium artist. Those who heard him live still talk of his ability to deliver perfect performances with an electrifying punch. He never missed, they say. As his archives confirm, many could not help but write to him in praises following his many solo performances. Whether Falcone was presenting clinics around the nation or inspiring the next generation in the public schools of his own backyard across the Mitten and Midwest, he was always praised for his accuracy, dazzling technique, and singing bel canto style. And to our benefit, his musicianship as a soloist is documented through his multiple acclaimed recordings. Recordings that had far reaches, including one that made its way to California, where a junior high tubist named Roger Bobo found them in his band room amongst his music teacher's collection. His recordings also reached a very musical household in Dixon, Illinois, where Brian Bowman first heard Leonard Falcone upon his father bringing home the Volume 1 recording early in his high school years. I asked Dr. Bowman about his involvement with Falcone, and he wrote me just last week saying, "I remember getting all the music for the solos that were on the album and picked Clark's From the Shores of the Mighty Pacific for my contest solo my sophomore year." During Bowman's junior year, in the spring, the Michigan State Band came to his hometown, and the Bowman household hosted the euphonium section, a member of which was Jeff Price, who would become a member of the U.S. Marine Band. Dr. Bowman recalled them telling him that one of Falcone's favorite sayings in lessons was, "Just not professional enough." To this day, Dr. Bowman lists Falcone among his great influences, noting especially his fiery technique, his style, and articulation. I have seen in person tears of joy well up in many of his former students' eyes as they recall their studies and time shared with this great man. Indeed, many of his former students, like Earl Lauder, Roger Berend, and Marty Erickson, went on to be movers and shakers in the low brass world. Countless others ended up in top professional performance or teaching positions around the nation. Still, in East Lansing, there is more to the name Falcone than the baritone. I learned this when I taught my first low brass methods class as a graduate student at Michigan State in the fall of 2014. I typically would start each class with a short recording of different artists, a mix of new and historic figures, to see where the profession was going and to show them how it got there. When I got to Falcone, well into the semester, my 8 a.m. Monday morning students suddenly perked up with the natural excitement of recognition. Some of them even began telling me about him in regards to his contributions to the field of music education and band. It was at that moment that I realized that East Lansing is still very much Leonard Falcone's town. Outside of East Lansing, we remember him today mostly for his contributions to the world of euphonium. But his archives reveal there is much more to his story. Please join me now as we take a walk through Leonard Falcone's archives, held on the campus of Michigan State University, to provide a deeper glimpse into his life's opus. I'll share with you some of the many outstanding documents found amongst the thousands that are carefully organized and held at MSU, a collection of documents spanning from 1916 to 1985. For what it's worth, the MSU Archives website lists the physical description of its Leonard Falcone papers as 30.6 cubic feet. Here's an example of just a few. Anyone who spends time researching something of great interest to them knows of the excitement that builds when you find something of great importance and relevance. I remember that excitement as I walked into the MSU Archives for the first time. Little did I know that I was standing at the base of a mountain. The objectives of this presentation are as follows. to present a visually impacting chronological presentation of the Leonard Falcone archives. To capture the multifaceted impact that Leonard Falcone had as a soloist, band director, and music educator. To specifically discuss his developmental years as he became a prominent euphonium soloist and nationally known band director. To present his legacy as the narrative of his life and series of accomplishments in the fields of instrumental education and applied teaching. Falcone came to America carrying his valved trombone with him in 1915. By 1917, he had won a violin in a street fair and began teaching himself how to play. Eventually, he would begin taking lessons with a local musician who would encourage him to begin studying at the University Music School in Ann Arbor, what was to become the University of Michigan School of Music. Here he is in a picture dated 1917, at 18 years old. This program features Falcone performing on a student's recital dated February 2nd, 1921. It must have been one of his very first solo performances on the violin. And here is a concert from the Supervisors Orchestra of the University School of Music from June of 1927, mere weeks before Falcone would assume the role as Michigan State's band director. Note that Joe Maddie is the director listed. Maddie would go on to start the National Music Camp in the following year, 1928, a camp that is today known as Interlochen Center for the Arts. Maddie must have been deep into its planning stages at the time of this concert. This concert is also special as it features both Falcone brothers, with Nicholas soloing on the Weber Concertino for clarinet, and Leonard conducting Grieg's The Last Spring from his two elegiac melodies, Opus 34. Like his brother Nicholas, Leonard gigged around Ann Arbor and Detroit. Eventually, both became directors of very popular silent movie theater orchestras. This role gave both brothers amazing publicity, as their names were often printed in advertisements and on ticket stubs. In 1923, Leonard was named director of the popular 1,900-seat Majestic Theater in Ann Arbor. This put his name on the spotlight in the community. Here is a picture of the theater at near capacity. This is Leonard Falcone's graduate recital from the University of Michigan, May 28, 1926. He would graduate with an artist diploma. In August of 1927, Falcone was named as the band director of what was then called the Michigan State College of Agriculture and Applied Science. This is an article in the Lansing State Journal published on September 16, 1927, announcing new hires in the music building. Its opening states that music will be made a significant part of college life. The new staff pictured here are, from left to right, Arthur Farwell, an American composer who developed his own lithograph music printing company, Falcone, Hope Holliday, the first professor of music education at Michigan State College, and Lewis Richards on the far right, the head of the music department. As an interesting side note, Richards toured Europe as a concert pianist until the outbreak of the First World War. In 1914, Herbert Hoover came to the relief of Belgium, and Richards served as one of his principal aides. He then organized the distribution of clothing and foodstuffs at Brussels and northern France. Richards' relationship with Hoover would benefit MSU and its band in the coming years, as we will see. Richards, along with Falcone, were two individuals who would help make great advancements in the music program at Michigan State University. At the same time, Leonard's brother Nicholas was heading up the band at the University of Michigan. Tragically, in 1934, Nicholas would resign due to a complete loss of hearing. This dual appointment was a very well-known fact among students and within the communities, because the Falcone brothers were already well-known and associated with the music scene. And also at the time, people were more interested in the band than the football teams, who had identical records in 1928. 3, 4, and 1. Here is a clearer picture of Nicholas and Leonard around this time. And here they are 50 years later at an award ceremony for Nicholas at the University of Michigan. It is surmised that one of Leonard's first solo appearances on the euphonium was at the Interlaken summer camp, where he was leading violin sectionals, conducting bands, and soloing. Here are 2 pictures of him doing so at Interlaken. Note the different equipment in both pictures. In 1930, the National High School Band Contest was held in Flint, Michigan. According to the Journal of Band Research, 44 bands participated. The contest went well into the evening, and at midnight the final event of the night was given, a performance by the hosting Flint band. All of the other band members were in the auditorium listening to the concert, because after which the competition results would be announced. According to this article, Falcone gave one of his electrifying performances. The judges roused themselves from a long sleep when Mr. Falcone began to play, according to all accounts. Those judges included none other than A. Austin Harding of the legendary University of Illinois Band, Edwin Franco Goldman, Captain Taylor Bronson of the U.S. Marine Band, and John Philip Sousa. This performance would win Falcone engagements with the Goldman Band, A. Austin Harding's University of Illinois Band, and Harold Bachman's $1 Million Band of Chicago. On October 31st, 1930, Michigan State College played football against Georgetown in Washington, D.C. While there, the band performed the Star-Spangled Banner at the wreath-laying ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in the Arlington Cemetery. Later that morning, the band traveled to the White House, where they were received by President Herbert Hoover. Here is a picture of Falcone conducting the band for President Hoover on the South Lawn. And a pose with the entire band. Later that afternoon, the band poses for the pictures on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building. Also in 1930, Falcone incorporated a tradition from his days in the fine Italian band of his hometown. Outdoor, open-air concerts, sure to be a hit with social distancing. And here is a very early program from that time period. These concerts would grow to enormous popularity, eventually attracting crowds exceeding 3,000 people. Because of the sustaining popularity, the class of 1937 initiated the construction of a bandshell that was dedicated in this 1938 program. Unfortunately, the bandshell was eventually torn down as the university expanded to make way for new buildings. I'm told you never asked Dr. Falcone about this. In 1939, the world found itself in its Second Great War. After the United States became involved, Falcone temporarily resigned from his Michigan State post and enlisted. He served from September 23, 1942 to June 2, 1943. As an interesting side note, in Falcone's absence, Dale Harris stepped in to assume the roles while he was gone. Dale Harris was a local band director who led a fantastic music program at Pontiac High School. A few years later, that program would produce another euphonium player named Ray G. Young. After the war, Falcone found that the universities were gutted, with many of the male students that made up his band now serving overseas. In this 1946 article, Falcone states that we only had 30 people returning in the marching band. Quoting Falcone, "We are worst off in the noise section. We have no baritone players on hand and need at least 4. Years later, in a 1969 interview at the Midwest Clinic in Chicago, The interviewer, only identified as McCarroll, asked Falcone about his band program and the influence of World War II. Falcone responds by saying, "The decrease in manpower during the war gave us a chance to bring the girls into our bands." He goes on to say, "After World War II, we finally changed the military uniform to a regular band uniform, and we had girls in the band. We found a great deal of fine talent among the co-eds. During the war, we had a band of about 40. At least 2/3 of them were girls. When the GIs came back after the war, the membership simply increased. We still kept the girls." I find this statement very endearing for a variety of reasons. First of all, Falcone's phrasing. He says, "This gave us a chance to bring the girls into our bands." He didn't say we had to. Also, earlier in the interview, it's clear that Falcone's trying to bring up this point of making his bands co-ed. Several times in the interview, he tries to work it in, and for whatever reason, the interview takes a little distraction, and it takes him a while to get to this point. But he keeps circling around until he can. That shows me that this was something that Falcone was proud of. A few years after the war in 1949, he was boasting a marching band composed of 100 players. It would take a few more years for the Spartan marching band to welcome co-eds, but it was a trend set in motion and there was no going back. It appeared now all was back on course and set at MSU for a rebirth that would flourish to greater heights than ever before. Echoing the rest of the United States society, the 50s were a tremendously successful decade for the Falcone band program, and also Michigan State. Falcone directed his bands in extensive tours throughout the Midwest. His marching band performed in 2 Rose Bowl parades, putting it on the national spotlight, and the concert band made several highly praised performances at major national conferences. Also, the school was expanding rapidly, and in 1955 the state made the college a university, changing the name to Michigan State University of Agriculture and Applied Science, and eventually to Michigan State University in 1964. On January 17, 1953, the university celebrated Falcone's 25th year of service as the director of bands. This banquet was a huge undertaking with nearly 800 invitations sent out to alumni, band directors, and friends from around the country. Even though 250 had replied as coming, a terrible Michigan winter snowstorm kept about 100 people home. Still, reports of over 150 attendees celebrated Leonard Falcone's silver anniversary. Congratulations came in from all over the country. In a moment, we'll take a look at a few that stand out. I might suggest, if you have the opportunity on future viewings, to pause the video and read through these letters. I think you will enjoy them. Unfortunately, we do not have the time to do that today. Here is a letter from John Hanna, the president of the university, and from the mayor of Lansing and East Lansing, famed band director and arranger Ray Dvorak, the great march composer J.J. Richards, Edwin Franco Goldman. What a signature. This telegram comes from George Landers, a very influential Iowan band director. And now we'll look at a series of Western Union telegrams. This one comes from John Aiuli, a trumpet alumni of Michigan State, who performed with the Met, the New York Philharmonic, the Detroit Symphony, and eventually with the Atlanta Symphony, where he became the assistant conductor. Some circus royalty from Merle Evans. Famed band director of Northwestern University, Glenn Cliff Bainham. And my personal favorite, Carl King, who wrote, "Baritone players are indestructible. So say we all." In 1956, Michigan State traveled to Pasadena, California to support the Spartan football team. This 12-day tour, sponsored entirely by Oldsmobile, had performances and stops in Denver, Chicago, Las Vegas, Pasadena, Tucson, Dallas, and St. Louis. It also included a performance on The Bob Crosby Show in Los Angeles, a TV show broadcast around the nation to about 150 stations. This gave the MSU music program a national reputation overnight, all under the direction of Dr. Falcone. Looking through the personnel list, we can find several names of interest. One is Byron Autry, who would eventually go on to become the professor of trumpet at Michigan State. And another of note, especially to this community, is Earl Lauder. And I always hesitate to point out these names because invariably I will have missed someone. My sincere apologies if and when I do. But Falcone was not just busy with the marching band during this period. Here is a 1961 MSU concert band tour. That spring, the band performed 11 times. As best I can tell, Falcone did this every spring, starting in the 1950s all the way through the 60s at his retirement, surely as a recruitment opportunity for his ensembles. The band performed all over the Midwest. I found them performing in New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Indiana, and of course in Michigan. Here's the following year's schedule. In 1967, the 14th National Biennial Conference of the College Band Directors National Association was held in Ann Arbor, and Michigan State University's band was selected to perform. This was one of Falcone's two perfect performances, concerts in which he claimed he was completely satisfied, the other being in 1958 on the same stage in Hill Auditorium. Here is the program from that 1967 conference performance. Of particular note to me are the premieres. We might find it easy to associate Leonard Falcone with a dated repertoire from the late 19th century, possibly because of the selections he chose to record on his albums, and perhaps also because of his prominence in the era immediately following the great brass soloists of ensembles such as the Sousa Band. However, as a band director, he was very encouraging to composers to write for band, especially those on faculty, including H. Owen Reed and James Niblock. Once again, looking at the program, we may find a few familiar names. Heading up the tuba section, Marty Erickson. Finally, here is a picture of the band taken on this occasion in the beautiful Hill Auditorium of Ann Arbor. So let's hear this band. Sit back now and enjoy this recording of the beginning of Bizet's Carmen Suite as arranged for symphonic band by Nicholas Falcone and recorded by the MSU Symphonic Band conducted by Falcone in the early 60s. I've been told you can tell a good band when you don't miss the strings. On April 17th, 1966, Falcone wrote a letter to the director of the music department which read, "On April 5th, 1967, I will have reached the age of 68, and by July 1st, 1967, I will have served the university for 40 years. In consideration of these factors, this seems to be the proper time to retire." Falcone would go out with a bang with his performances in Ann Arbor, and must have left with a feeling of tremendous accomplishment. The university quickly named Harry Bijan as his successor. Though he retired as director of bands, Falcone continued on teaching applied lessons nearly to the end of his life. The 1970s were a decade of prosperity for the euphonium studio at Michigan State. Here are a few examples. This is a 1977 concert of the MSU Symphony Band under the direction of Kenneth Blomquist, with guest conductors Leonard Falcone and Jerry Billick. Falcone conducted the band in the Barat Andante and Allegro, featuring the entire euphonium section playing in unison, the Stars and Stripes Forever March, and the overture to Verdi's Sicilian Vespers. Focusing in on that euphonium section, we see Roger Barrand, who of course had a long career with the U.S. Navy Band in Washington, D.C. And of special note, each of the other members of the section continue to make music or teach music. Terry Stansel, the son of the founder of Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, Fritz Stansel, went on to be a longtime band director in Harbor Springs, Michigan. And I know personally that Mike Schott, Tom Gillette, and Mike Fisher all still play their euphoniums to this day as they are active in the Michigan brass band scene. And that, to me, is as good as any a testament to the love of music making that Falcone instilled in his students. Here's Thomas Gillette's degree recital from 1978. This 1970 low brass studio concert features tubist Eugene Dowling and James Curnow on euphonium. Falcone was known for sending his euphonium students to the U.S. service bands, and there are several correspondences with the band directors and letters of recommendation from over the years in his archives. Here is an example of that working in reverse, as Robert Jorgensen came to MSU after serving as solo euphonium with the U.S. Army Field Band. Jorgensen studied with Falcone and Blomquist while moving into the band directing field. His degree recital here in 1974 was accompanied by his wife Anne, and also includes his brother Richard Jorgensen, who taught trumpet for 34 years at Arkansas State University in Jonesboro. Mr. Jorgensen, Robert Jorgensen that is, would go on to be the director of bands at the University of Akron, where he was my band director. And he died doing what he loved, conducting a band on the 4th of July. Here's a picture of Mr. Jorgensen as a graduate student assisting the Spartan Marching Band baritone section. He is in the back row standing second from the left, and on the far left is Professor Kenneth Blomquist. And here is Roger Barron's degree euphonium recital, accompanied by none other than David Gillingham. Falcone the man was revered by his colleagues and students alike. He was respected as an authority in music, but was admired for his kind, understanding, and modest soul. I wanted to play this speech that took place in East Lansing 1 month after Falcone was inducted into the National Band Association's Hall of Fame of Distinguished Band Conductors. After a warm introduction by Kenneth Bloomquist, Falcone is welcomed in his hometown, where he gives this warm speech, highlighting some of the more endearing qualities of his personality.
Standing backstage, I listen to all the praise I've been receiving this brother God. That is the matter to nation. I have been unable in my life to give receiving hand of praises that feel comfortable. Read back the countries. I usually on the other side of the fence, so to speak, in giving praise to somebody else, such as famous football players, coaches, groundkeepers, when they retire, and so forth. We're not accustomed to receiving ourselves. However, I'm not a human. To that admit, and I feel very proud of this very high honor. As Professor Lewis told you about the Dutch ceremony at Georgia State University, Georgia State, Alabama, on today, it was a very moving experience for me, especially because it was done in a very dignified and appropriate manner. And I was very fortunate to have Professor Lewis to be my presenters and call. He made a very eloquent speech in which he gave the resume of my musical career. Actually, he very grateful to Dr. Lewis for what he's done for me. When I'm up here, I would like to express my thanks and appreciation for the cooperation I'm going to receive from the members of this very fine band. I've enjoyed working with them very, very much. I know to God, I much appreciate your cooperation. And last but not least, I would like to say that I will be forever grateful to the officials and the members of the Michigan State University alumni band, which initiated my candidacy for and pursuant to the end to my election. I want to thank you so much for many things what you've done for me. Also, I appreciate your people who come to this house and be with us tonight. So thank you very much for everyone.
For me, there are two takeaways from this very special glimpse into Falcone's personality. First, he titles himself by saying, "We band conductors." I think that's an important distinction. I think if we asked Dr. Falcone, he would consider himself a conductor, a director of bands. That's what the archives tell me. Those thousands of documents, the ones that Dr. Falcone preserved. And number two, this speech that is given as a result of recognition of Dr. Falcone's contributions to the world of music education and band, 75% of it is giving thanks to others. Thanks to Professor Bloomquist. Thanks to the alumni who got him elected. Thanks to the groundskeepers. Thanks to the musicians on the stage. thanks to every single person in that auditorium that night. That, to me, says an awful lot about who Falcone was. On May 2nd, 1985, Leonard Falcone passed away in a care facility in Dimondale, Michigan, a small town just southwest of Lansing. And the torch was finally passed. All who were influenced by this man have ensured that his legacy continues in what is one of the most beautiful tributes a person could ever ask for. In September of 2014, this memorial plaque was placed outside of Falcone's office during his tenure as band director. It reads, "His legacy lives on today in the form of legions of loyal students who have gone on to teach and play throughout the world." Falcone also had a long association with the Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, working there from 1964 to 1984. He directed the camp's first international band tour in 1971, which made a stop to his hometown in Italy. He donated most of his time at Blue Lake, refusing salary. And as a result of his association and leadership with the camp, they built and dedicated the Leonard Falcone Band Pavilion in 1976. Much of Falcone's legacy has been documented in Rita Griffin Comstock's 2011 book, Solid Brass, The Leonard Falcone Story. And I must add that that was an invaluable source for this presentation. And of course, one of the main initiatives to carry on his tradition is you. The Leonard Falcone International Euphonium and Tuba Festival in Blue Lake. All of the people, the teachers, the competitors, accompanists, the board of directors, groundskeepers, and especially the elves, make it happen every year and have given our community a launching pad for many of the profession's great artists. My heartfelt thanks to the board of directors at the Falcone Festival for allowing me to retrace these steps, and in doing so, reconnecting to this amazing story of the American dream. In closing, I would like to read an excerpt from a letter written in 1977 by Bill Moffett, an innovator in the marching band world who was the assistant band director at Michigan State from 1960 to 1969. He wrote this letter in support of Falcone's honorary doctorate, which was awarded in 1978. Here he writes, "Leonard Falcone is one of those rare human beings who dedicates his life to others, and who serves as a living example of what each of us hopes to accomplish in our own lifetimes. First of all, he is a great human being with compassion for others, with a love of beauty in life as well as in music, with the ability to inspire others to achieve at their capacity, with leadership in the profession that is known and respected throughout the world, and with the physical and mental energy to maintain his contribution to the university and to music at a rate that would exhaust most of his colleagues. He is a giant amongst men. He is a giant among musicians. He is a giant among teachers."